welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. And today, I'm bringing you my new original story.
Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. This is a horror story called Mile Marker 9. Eddie Crane had been driving long haul for 19 years, and in that time he had developed an intimate and somewhat clinical relationship with the state of Maine. He knew its roads the way a doctor knew a difficult patient, the history, the quirks, the places where it was liable to turn on you without warning. He knew which rest stops on I-95 had functioning showers and which ones had given up on that particular ambition. He knew that Route 9 between Bangor and Calais, the airline road locals called it, for the crow-straight stubbornness of its path across the barrens, was one of the loneliest stretches of asphalt on the eastern seaboard. 100 miles of scrub spruce and bog and granite silence that made certain men philosophical and made other men pull over and sit with aisles for a while, with the engine running and the radio loud and their hands pressed flat against the steering wheel until the feeling passed. He was one of the second kind, had been once. Not anymore, he told himself. Not in a long time. It was November, a Tuesday, and the load was paper products, rolls of newsprint out of Millinocket, headed for a printing facility outside Ellsworth, a nothing run, a run he'd made 20 times. He'd left Millinocket at 11 at night, specifically to have Route 9 to himself, which is how he preferred it, the dark ahead of him, broken only by his own lights, the radio set to the country station out of Bangor that faded to static around Clifton, but was worth it for the company while it lasted. He passed the sign for Westley at midnight, and that was when he noticed the lights in the rear view. Not headlights, too low, too diffuse, not the hard double beam of another vehicle, but something softer, distributed, like a glow rather than a source. He watched it in the mirror for 1.5 miles, trying to fit it into an explanation. Another truck running without headlights, possible but idiotic on Route 9 in November. A fire on the roadside? He'd have smelt it. Equipment malfunction in his own rig, casting a reflection. He went through the possibilities the way he went through his pre-trip checklist, methodically, without investment in any particular outcome. The lights stayed behind him, not gaining, not falling back, matching his speed exactly, which was 63 miles an hour, which was the speed at which his rig ran comfortably in a 55 zone, and which felt suddenly like a very specific number to be exactly matched by something in the dark. He reached for the radio and turned it up. The country station had gone to static. He drove. The thing about Route 9 that most people didn't understand, people who'd only seen it in daylight on a summer trip to the coast, was that it had a quality after midnight in November that was almost geological in its depth, not just dark, not just empty, empty in the way that geologically ancient things were empty, from a time before anything that used light or made sound had arrived to complicate the silence. The barrens on either side were the remnant of a landscape that the glaciers had scraped clean 12,000 years ago, and that had recovered in the stubborn, minimal way that things recovered when the conditions were barely sufficient. Blueberry scrub, tamarack, bog moss, black spruce that topped out at 15 feet after 70 years of growing. No houses, no lights, no indication for miles at a time that anything capable of reading a sign or building a road had ever been through here. Eddie had always found this comforting, the scale of it, the reminder that the things people worried about, money, health, the diesel price, his ex-wife Sandra's opinion of his parenting, the transmission on this particular truck that needed looking at, were local problems, small in the way that everything human was small against 12,000 years of granite and bog. He didn't find it comforting tonight. He drove 8 miles with the lights in his mirror, watching them with the sideways attention you developed after 2 decades behind the wheel, present without staring, tracking without fixating. And then he did something he'd never done on this road before. He slowed down, not to a stop, gradually over the course of a quarter mile, from 63 to 45 to 30, testing. The lights slowed with him. He accelerated back to 63. The lights did the same. He had driven plenty of dark roads with things behind him, tailgaters mostly, the particular aggression of the civilian driver who resented being stuck behind a rig and expressed this resentment with their high beams. He had driven through storms with zero visibility and navigated on memory and instrument. He had pulled over once in a whiteout on I-95 outside of Augusta and sat for 40 minutes while the storm made up its mind and listened to the wind work on the trailer and felt the specific vertigo of sitting still in a machine designed for movement. He knew what fear was and what it wasn't, and he knew the difference between the two in his body, the way he knew the difference between a tire that was low and one that was flat, the same category, different severity. What was behind him was not a tailgater, and was not a storm, and was not anything that had a name he'd ever learned. He was not a man who was easily frightened. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself, in the privacy of his own cab. He had the ordinary courage of someone who had lived with real difficulties for long enough that hypothetical ones required some evidence before they got his full attention. His son Danny had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 9, and Eddie had spent the first year of it waking at 2 in the morning, convinced he could feel something wrong through the walls, the way parents did. And he had learned in that year to manage the difference between the fear that was information and the fear that was noise. This, he decided, was information. He looked for a place to pull off. Route 9 had turnouts, logging road junctions mostly, unsigned gravel breaks in the tree line where the trucks that serviced the timber operations could get clear of the road. He remembered one coming up, a half mile, maybe less. He'd used it before. He watched the tree line, and there it was, on the right, and he swung in without signaling, no one to signal to, and killed the lights and sat. The dark was total. He'd forgotten for a moment how total it was out here without his own headlights. Maine dark was not the dark of cities or suburbs or even small towns where there was always some ambient glow, some evidence of the electrical century. This was older dark, pre-electrical, the kind of dark in which the absence of light was a thing with texture and weight, in which your eyes, after the first 30 seconds of adjustment, and the 30 seconds after that, and the 30 seconds after that, found nothing to grip. Flat black, absolute. He sat in it and listened to his own breathing, and to the tick of the cooling engine, and to the perfect silence of the barrens, which was not really silence. There was always wind if you waited, always the small adjustments of trees responding to the cold, always something which was close enough to silence that the difference seemed academic. He watched the road through his windshield. Whatever had been behind him passed. He felt it rather than saw it, a displacement, a change in the pressure of the dark, the way a very large object moving nearby changed the air even when you couldn't see it. His truck rocked, not from wind. There was no wind tonight. The trees were perfectly still, but from the passage of something with enough mass to push air. The displacement moved from behind him to beside him to ahead of him over the course of about 4 seconds, and then it was gone, and the dark settled back, and Route 9 was empty in both directions as far as he could see. He sat for 6 minutes. He knew he could, because he watched the clock, 6 minutes and 20 seconds, and then he pulled back onto Route 9 and kept driving east. He did not see the lights again that night, but 20 minutes later, at mile marker 9 on the Calais end of the Barrens, he passed something on the roadside that he will think about for the rest of his life.
A truck, parked in the breakdown lane facing west, facing the wrong direction, which meant it had not simply pulled over, but had come to rest there from the other direction, had crossed the road or turned around, or been placed there. A Kenworth T680, dark blue, older model, with a 48-foot refrigerated trailer behind it. No running lights, no hazard flashes, just parked in the dark, facing the wrong way, on the loneliest road in Maine. He slowed. The cab was occupied. He could see, as his headlights swept across the truck's passenger side, a shape in the driver's seat, a person, seated upright, both hands visible on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He drove past slowly, not stopping, but not at speed either. The shape in the cab did not move as his lights crossed it, not the subtle shift of a person caught in headlights, the instinctive flinch toward the source of brightness, not the slow turn of someone waking. Nothing. The stillness of something that had been sitting in that position for a very long time and had become, through repetition, part of the position itself. The refrigerator unit was running. He could hear it as he passed, the familiar industrial hum of a reefer unit, the compressed air heartbeat of active refrigeration, which meant the truck had power, which meant someone had started it up, or it had never stopped. Eddie pulled up behind it and sat for a moment with his hazards on. Every protocol said call it in. A truck parked in the breakdown lane facing the wrong direction at 1 in the morning warranted a welfare check at minimum. He reached for his CB. The CB was producing a sound he'd never heard from it before. Not static, not interference, something lower and more deliberate, rhythmic, below the frequency at which his radio was supposed to operate, like a carrier wave without a signal, like something broadcasting on the wrong channel, but with tremendous conviction about the broadcast. He set the CB down. He looked at the shape in the driver's seat of the dark Kenworth. The shape was perfectly still, not sleeping still, the boneless, collapsed stillness of someone unconscious, upright still, 10 and 2 still, the stillness of someone who was very deliberately not moving, not the stillness of someone who didn't know he was there, the stillness of someone who was waiting to see what he would do. Eddie put his truck in gear and drove. He told himself he would report it from the truck stop in Calais. He told himself this for the remaining 40 minutes of the run, and when he reached the Flying J in Calais, he sat in the lot for 20 minutes and then drove to the loading dock at the printing facility and completed his delivery, and did not call anything in. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the lot and drank bad coffee and watched the sky get light and thought about all the things he knew how to do and how none of them applied. When he got home to Brewer 2 days later, he had a backhaul to arrange, so he had stayed over. He sat at his kitchen table and typed the Kenworth's details into a search. He remembered the plate number because he remembered plate numbers the way some people remembered faces, automatically,
without effort. He had a theory about this. The brain made room for what it used. The plate came back to Harrow Freight, LLC, headquartered in Clifton, Maine. He called the number on the website. It rang 11 times, no voicemail. He searched Harrow Freight in the Maine Business Registry. The company had been incorporated in 1987 and dissolved in 2003. He closed the laptop and sat at his kitchen table and listened to his apartment and thought about the shape at 10 and 2, the truck that shouldn't have been running, the refrigeration unit humming its steady industrial pulse on the loneliest road in the state, keeping something cold in the dark. He did the Millinocket-Ellsworth run twice a month, and for the first 3 runs after the night with the lights, he took I-95 down to Bangor and Route 1 out to Ellsworth, the coastal route, the long way, which added 190 minutes and which he justified to himself with invented reasons: the weather, the delivery window, the condition of the route. He was hiding from it. He knew this the way you knew things you didn't want to know, from the corner of the eye, in the half-awake hour between 3 and 4 in the morning, when the mind dropped its professional courtesy and said plainly what was true. He was afraid of mile marker 9. He was afraid of the dark Kenworth and the shape at 10 and 2, the lights that matched his speed in the mirror, and the CB sound like a carrier wave broadcasting on the wrong frequency. He was afraid in the specific way that adult men who had made careers out of managing their fear were afraid, aware of the fear, contemptuous of the awareness, unable to act against it. He talked to no one. This was not unusual. Eddie Crane's life had a structure that worked. Co-parenting with Sandra, who was a better co-parent than she'd been a wife, which he respected. Twice-weekly calls with Danny, the loose social ecosystem of the Flying J in Calais and the truck stop in Millinocket, and the handful of drivers he'd known long enough that the silence between them was comfortable. It was a structure built for efficiency, not for the kind of conversation that began with, "I think something followed me on Route 9, and I pulled into a turnout, and it passed, and I could feel it passing through the walls of the cab." He didn't tell anyone that. His dispatcher, a man named Phil Ardmore, who had worked with Eddie for 11 years and who communicated primarily in grunts arranged in a grammar that only long-time familiarity could pass, noticed on the 3rd run. 9, Phil said, which was the entirety of his communication. "Coastal's fine," Eddie said. A pause that contained Phil's assessment of this claim. "9's fine, faster." "Yeah." Another pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Phil." Phil grunted in a register that meant, "This conversation is going in the file, but I'm not going to push it," and they moved on to the backhaul discussion. The 4th run, in late December, Eddie took Route 9. It was habit more than courage. He was tired. Danny had been in the hospital for 3 days with a bad infection, an occupational hazard of type 1, and Eddie had driven from Brewer to Portland and back twice, and had slept in total perhaps 12 hours in the preceding week, and I-95 to the coast felt wasteful in a way that Route 9 did not. Route 9 was efficient. Route 9 was his road. He had driven it for 19 years. He had earned it. He left Millinocket at 11. He had the radio on, different station now, classic rock out of Bangor that carried better through the barrens. He drove with the focused, half-meditative attention of the experienced long-hauler, present but not tense, watching the road with the wide peripheral vision that was the primary professional skill nobody talked about in trucking school. He passed Wesley at 20 past midnight. He checked his mirrors. Nothing. He exhaled, a breath he hadn't known he was holding, and drove on, and for the next 30 miles he was fine, better than fine, the run normalizing itself the way he'd known it would, the familiar landmarks coming up in the right order, the road doing what roads did. He thought about Danny and about the backhaul he had lined up from Calais, and about the transmission that was not getting any better on its own, and about the country station and whether it would hold through the barrens tonight. Then he passed mile marker 9. The dark Kenworth was there. Same position, same breakdown lane, same wrong direction. The refrigerated trailer behind it humming with the low industrial sound of active refrigerating units, which meant it was running, which meant it had power, which meant someone had started it up in the intervening weeks, or it had never stopped. And in the driver's seat, visible as Eddie's headlights caught the cab, the shape, upright, both hands at 10 and 2. Eddie did not slow down this time. He passed at 63 miles an hour, and he kept his eyes on the road ahead, and he did not look in the rear view for a full minute. He counted the seconds. He had never counted seconds behind the wheel before. It made the minute feel very long, and the road very specific, and the distance between where he was and mile marker 9 feel like a thing being built 1 second at a time, assembled out of the dark. When he looked, the road behind him was dark. At the truck stop in Calais, he found he'd bitten through his lower lip sometime in the last 40 minutes. He didn't remember doing it. There was blood on his chin and a copper taste in his mouth that the bad coffee didn't quite cover. He called the Maine State Police non-emergency line. He described the truck, the location, the plate number, the shape in the cab. He was calm and precise and provided all the information they would need to run the plate and send a unit. The dispatcher thanked him and took the information, and he drove home. 3 days later, he called back for a follow-up. They had no record of the call. January. The cold in Maine in January was not the cold of other places. It was a cold with intention, with the focused negativity of something that had decided the region needed to be reminded of certain fundamental facts. The thermometer at Eddie's apartment in Brewer read -11 on the morning he drove to Millinocket for the run, and the roads were what they always were in Maine in January, technically passable, which was the polite way of describing a surface that was trying, in its low-key way, to kill you. He took Route 9. He had decided at some point between Thanksgiving and Christmas that taking the long way was a form of concession he was not prepared to make. He was 44 years old. He had driven this road 200 times. Whatever was at mile marker 9 was something that could be explained, and his failure to explain it was a failure of information, not of reality. He told himself this. He left Millinocket at 10:45, earlier than usual, because in January the conservative choice was always to build in time for the road. He had the heater cranked and the radio on, and a thermos of real coffee from his own kitchen, because the Millinocket truck stop's coffee in January tasted like it was also trying to kill him. He was an hour out of Millinocket, just past the Clifton line, when his headlights caught something in the road that made him brake hard. A man, standing in the eastbound lane, facing west, directly in Eddie's path. Eddie's training took over before his thoughts did. The ABS, the trailer brakes, the controlled stop that kept 60,000 pounds of truck and load from becoming physics problem. He stopped 30 feet from the man, close enough to see him clearly in the headlights. He was perhaps 60, heavy-set, wearing a Carhartt jacket and watch cap, the clothes of a working man, the clothes of a man who drove trucks for a living. He was standing in the lane without apparent alarm, looking at Eddie's truck with an expression that was very still and very patient. Eddie cracked the window. The January air hit him like a blade. "You all right?" he called. The man's expression didn't change. "You need help? You got a breakdown?" The man looked at Eddie for a long moment. Then he looked past Eddie at something behind the truck, over the roof of the trailer. His gaze tracked slowly, following something, the way you tracked a bird across the sky. Eddie did not turn around to look. He was aware that he didn't want to turn around. He was aware of this awareness in a clinical way that was probably what people meant when they talked about survival instinct, the part of you that was older than rational thought, making a unilateral decision on behalf of the whole organism. "Get out of the road," Eddie said. His voice was level. The man looked at Eddie again. His face in the headlights was familiar in a way Eddie couldn't immediately account for. Not someone he knew. Familiar in a different way, of the familiarity of a type, of something he'd seen many times without registering, like a species of bird that was common enough to overlook. The man stepped off the road to the shoulder. Eddie drove. He watched the man in his mirrors, standing on the shoulder, watching the truck pass, not moving, still looking at that same point above the trailer roof. At mile marker 9, he did not look at the breakdown lane. He kept his eyes on the road ahead and drove at 68 miles an hour and did not slow down until Calais. In Calais, at the Flying J, he sat in the lot with the engine idling and the heat going, and he made himself think about the man's face. Familiar. The wrong kind of familiar. He got his phone out and found the photo. He'd taken it months ago, from a distance, a habit left over from years of documenting road incidents for insurance purposes, of the plate on the dark Kenworth. He looked up Harrow Freight again, found the business listing, found a name. The registered agent for the now dissolved company was a man named Walter Cray of Clifton, Maine. He found an obituary from the Bangor Daily News dated April 2003. Walter Cray, 61, of Clifton, truck driver, survived by his daughter Karen Cray of Bangor, died following a single vehicle accident on Route 9. The photograph beside the obituary was small and slightly pixelated in the way of newspaper images reproduced online. It was the man from the road. Eddie sat in the Flying J lot for a very long time. He looked at the photograph, and he looked at the dark outside his windows, and he thought about Danny, who was 11 years old, and who called his dad every night before bed, because this was the agreement they had, father and son, that no matter where Eddie was on the road, no matter the hour, they would talk. He called Danny. "Hey, buddy." "Hey, Dad." Danny's voice, sleep thick. "Where are you?" "Calais. Delivered the run." "Good. You coming home?" "Couple of days. Got a backhaul." A pause. Then, in the particular way of children who were paying attention, "You okay, Dad?" "I'm good," Eddie said. "Go back to sleep." "You sound funny." "I'm just tired." "Okay." A pause. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, buddy." He sat in the lot until morning. He told someone. He'd been keeping it to himself for 3 months, and this was partly because he was a private man, and partly because he was a practical man, and private, practical men did not tell people that they kept seeing a dead trucker on a stretch of Maine highway where that dead trucker had died 20 years ago, not without evidence, not without a clear idea of what they expected the listener to do with the information. He told Karen Cray. He found her through the obituary. She was on Facebook, as it turned out, which was a site Eddie found unsettling in its cheerful domesticity, but which was occasionally useful. He sent a message explaining who he was, that he drove Route 9 regularly, that he had some questions about her father's accident. He did not tell her about the figure in the road. He was not ready to tell anyone that. He called her on a Thursday morning. Her voice was the voice of a woman in her late 30s who had processed a difficult thing for long enough that she could talk about it without the processing becoming audible, which took time and work, and which Eddie respected. "You drive that road," she said. It was not quite a question. "Regular run, Millinocket to Ellsworth." "My dad drove it for 20 years. I know that sounds crazy for a road that looks like that." "It doesn't," Eddie said. He said it was the most honest road he'd ever driven. Nothing to look at except what was actually there. Eddie said nothing. "The accident was in February," Karen said. "Black ice. He went into the trees at mile marker 9. There's a bad curve there. You probably know it. The guardrail on that section had been reported to the DOT twice that winter. It still wasn't fixed." Her voice was flat and factual. "He wasn't found for almost 20 hours because of the weather. By the time they found him..." She stopped. "By the time they found him, it didn't matter." "I'm sorry," Eddie said. "What did you want to ask me?" He'd been assembling the question for 3 weeks, trimming it down to what was essential, and what remained was this. Did your father ever mention anything unusual about that road? Not the accident, before, in the years he drove it. A pause. What kind of unusual? Anything he couldn't explain, anything he saw that he didn't have a category for. The pause this time was longer, long enough that Eddie checked to make sure the call was still connected. "He had a name for something," Karen said, finally. "I heard him say it a few times when I was a kid. He'd come home from a run and he'd be quiet, inward. My mother called it the long-haul quiet. She said all the drivers got it, but sometimes it was different, more specific." A pause. "He called it the follower. I asked him once what that meant. He said sometimes on that road at night something came up behind you and matched your speed, and you didn't look in the mirror, you just drove, and eventually it fell back. He said the important thing was not to stop." Eddie's hand was tight on the phone. "What happened if you stopped?" He didn't say. A pause. He changed the subject. My dad was not a man who changed subjects. He talked about everything. His whole life he talked too much, my mother said. Drove her crazy. But he changed that subject. Karen was quiet for a moment. "I think he didn't know. I think he'd never stopped. He'd always kept driving, and it had always fallen back, and so he had the rule, don't stop, without the knowledge of what the rule was preventing. Until he did stop." "Until he did stop," Karen agreed. "After he died, I went out there, to the spot. The trees had been there. You could see where the truck went through, the broken spruce, the channel it made in the snow going down the embankment. There was still glass in the shoulder, small pieces. They don't clean that stuff up out in the barrens. There's no crew for it, and by the time anyone would have thought to clean it up, the snow had come again and buried it." She paused. "There were tracks in the snow, stopping tracks, like something had braked hard long before the point where he went through the guardrail. He stopped on purpose. He made a decision to stop." Her voice was flat with the effort of saying it. "And then, this is the thing I've never told anyone. There were other marks in the snow, around the cab, not footprints, something else, like a pressure mark, distributed, like something very large and very heavy, had stood next to the cab and leaned against it. The snow was compressed in a shape I couldn't match to anything. She stopped. It was large. Whatever stood there was very large, and it had been there long enough to melt the snow slightly under itself, and then the temperature had dropped again, and it had frozen again, so the marks were clear, locked in the ice. Another pause. And the door was open, the driver's door. He'd opened it. He'd gotten out, or tried to, or... She stopped again. Karen. The seatbelt was cut, not torn, cut, clean edges. The accident report put it down to the crash, but the cut was at the buckle, not at the strap, and the edges were... She paused. I read the report 3 times. I'm not saying the investigators were wrong. I'm saying what I saw didn't match what the report said, and I was 22 and alone, and I decided not to say anything about it because I didn't know what I was saying. Eddie said, he stopped. He pulled over on purpose. The accident report says he lost control on ice. Karen. A long silence, long enough that the connection itself seemed to breathe. Yes, she said, very quietly, I think he stopped. I think something got close enough that he stopped. She exhaled slowly, the exhalation of someone releasing a thing they had been carrying in a specific configuration for 20 years. I think it was behind him, and he checked the mirror, just once, just a glance, and I think what he saw in the mirror... She stopped. I think it was the last thing he saw that made sense, and then he stopped, because whatever was in the mirror made stopping seem like the right response, and then... She didn't finish. I'm sorry, said Eddie. Don't stop, said Karen. It was not advice. It was the same flat, factual delivery she'd been using for the whole conversation. Whatever you saw out there, whatever you're seeing, don't stop. Keep your speed, and don't look in the mirror, and don't stop. A pause. That's what he would have told you. That's the one thing he knew for certain. I'll remember that, Eddie said. I know you will, Karen said. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called. February. He had to take the run. He needed the money. Danny's medical costs were what they always were, steady and significant, and Sandra had taken on extra shifts at the hospital where she worked, but the costs had a way of expanding to fill the financial space available, and then some. He had to take the run, and he took it, and he left Millinocket at 11 on a Tuesday in February, with ice on the windshield and a temperature of -8 and a thermos of coffee, and a conviction he was trying very hard to maintain that whatever was on Route 9 was something with an explanation, and that the explanation, once found, would reduce it to a thing that could be managed. He drove the first 40 miles in a state of focused, deliberate calm. The radio was on, country station, which had started to seem like old company, like a voice he'd known a long time. The road was okay, cold but treated. The road crews in Maine were competent in the way of people whose survival depended on competence, and the blacktop was gritty under his tires and gripping. He passed mile marker 20, mile marker 15, nothing in the mirrors, mile marker 12, mile marker 11. He became aware that he was counting down in a way he'd never counted on this road before, that the mile markers had acquired a meaning they hadn't previously had, that the geography of Route 9 had been reorganized around a single point, the way a magnetic field organized itself around a source. Mile marker 10. He checked the mirrors. Dark, the long, empty Maine dark, his taillights painting 2 thin red lines behind him, and nothing else. Mile marker 9. He did not look in the breakdown lane. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, both hands on the wheel, the truck moving at 63, steady, and he was past it. His CB spoke. Not static, a voice, low and unhurried, the voice of a man who spent a lot of time alone with an engine and had learned to talk in the register of people who weren't going anywhere fast. She told you not to stop. Good advice. Eddie kept driving, both hands on the wheel, 63 miles an hour. The thing about this road, the voice said, it was conversational, a little tired, the voice of a long-haul driver 300 miles into a run. Eddie did not respond. The thing about this road, the CB said, is that it knows what it is. Oldest road in Maine, some people say. Not the one they paved, the path under it, going back to when the people who were here built their own trails across the barrens. People have been moving through here for a long time, moving things. A pause. Some of the things they moved they didn't want to move, had to. That's the nature of freight. You carry what you're paid to carry, and you don't ask about the manifest. The voice was familiar, the wrong kind of familiar, the same way the man in the road had been familiar. There's something that follows this road, the voice said, and has been for a long time. I don't know what it is. I drove this road for 20 years and I never knew what it was. I know what it does. It follows, and if you stop... The voice paused in the way of a man who has considered his words. If you stop, it catches up, and then it's not following anymore. You understand? Yes, Eddie said. He was surprised to hear himself speak. You've got a son, the voice said. His hands tightened on the wheel. Danny, 11 years old, type 1, calls his dad every night. Don't, Eddie said. I'm not threatening him. I'm reminding you. You've got a son who calls his dad every night. That's a reason to keep moving. A pause. I didn't have a reason. That was my mistake. I'd been driving so long I'd forgotten what I was driving for. Another pause. Don't make my mistake. The CB went to static. Then it went to silence. Then the country station out of Bangor came back on, mid-song, as if it had never gone. Eddie drove. He drove the remaining 30 miles to Calais with both hands on the wheel and the radio on and the thermos untouched, and his eyes alternating between the road ahead and the mirrors with the regularity of a man who has decided to keep making the same decision over and over until the night was done. He did not see the lights. He did not see the truck. He did not see the man from the road. He saw, once, at mile marker 3, a reflection on the road surface ahead of him, some trick of his headlights and the ice-treated asphalt, something that might have been a shape and might have been nothing at all, present for a second and gone, swallowed by the dark between his lights and wherever they stopped reaching. He kept driving. He delivered at 7 in the morning, and he called Danny from the cab before his son left for school. "You're up early, Dad." "Night run," said Eddie. "Wanted to hear your voice." "I'm fine," said Danny, in the tone of an 11-year-old who found adult concern occasionally excessive. "I checked it too. Levels were good." "Good. You okay?" Eddie looked at the loading dock. The delivery guys moving pallets in the cold morning, the ordinary mechanical theater of freight logistics proceeding as it always had, as it would continue to. "Yeah," he said, "I'm good. You sound... I'm good, Danny. He paused. I'm just glad you're there. A beat. Then, in the particular tone of children who loved their parents and sometimes found it embarrassing. Okay, Dad, weirdo. Yeah. Love you. Love you too, buddy. He drove home along the coast, the long way. He watched the urchin from the highway, grey and enormous and cold, and he felt what he sometimes felt looking at the ocean from above it, not comfort exactly, scale, the sense of his own proportions in relation to something that had been doing what it did for longer than any of the things he worried about had existed. He thought about Walter Cray, driving this road for 20 years, the follower behind him. 20 years of the same run, the same dark stretch, the same thing in the mirrors. He thought about what it meant that Walter Cray had stopped. He thought about what it meant that Walter Cray was still there, in some form, at mile marker 9, still driving, or still at 10 and 2, or still standing in the road, performing the shape of a man who drove trucks for a living, warning other drivers in the only way available to him now. He thought, some warnings only work if you deliver them in person. He thought, some roads you drive until you can't. He merged onto I-395 towards Brewer and the ordinary world of his apartment and his son's school schedule, and the transmission he needed to get looked at came back around him, and he let it, and he drove in it the way he drove in everything, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, moving. He took Route 9 the following month, and the month after that. It was his road. He did not stop at mile marker 9. He did not slow at mile marker 9. He passed it at 63 miles an hour with the radio on and his eyes on the forward dark and his hands at 10 and 2. And this became the practice, the ritual, the specific series of actions that he performed at that location on every run, the way you performed a series of actions at a place that meant something, because it meant something now, mile marker 9, whether he'd wanted it to or not. Some nights there was a glow in the mirrors, low and diffuse, keeping pace. Some nights the road was just the road. He learned to tell the difference by the quality of the dark rather than by what was visible in it. On the nights the follower was behind him, the dark had a texture, a density, the sense of something solid occupying a space that should have been empty. On the other nights, the dark was just the dark, and the barrens were just the barrens, and the mile markers counted down in the ordinary way of mile markers, disinterested arithmetic. He never spoke about it to anyone except Karen Cray, and Karen Cray he called 3 times in the year that followed, and each time they talked the way 2 people talked when they shared knowledge of something that couldn't be moved into daylight, carefully, with consideration for what the knowledge cost, with a mutual respect for the fact that neither of them had asked for it. In March, he called her to tell her that the dark Kenworth was still there on nights when the follower was behind him. He'd seen it 4 times since February. Same position, same running reefer, same shape at 10 and 2. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he's still doing the run, looks like. She stopped. I don't know if that's terrible or if it's something else. I know, Eddie said. He loved that road, she said, even at the end, even knowing what was on it. Some roads you drive until you can't, Eddie said. In April, early spring, but still cold, still capable of the long Maine dark that winter hoarded and released reluctantly, He heard the CB again. Just once, just a few words, in the same tired, unhurried voice. "Good run tonight. Keep moving." "Yeah," Eddie said. The static came. The country station came back. He drove. 3 miles later, he saw the lights of Calais on the horizon, the amber glow of a town at the edges of things, the evidence of people living under electric light in houses with walls, going about the business of their ordinary existence, and he felt what he felt every time he came out of the barrens and into the light, relief at the proportions of things, at the existence of towns at the edges of dark roads, at the fact that there were places where people stayed rather than moved, and which a man in a truck could come back to. He called Danny from the lot. "Night run again?" "Yeah." "You got a weird schedule, Dad." "I do." "You should get a normal job," Danny said. He was 12 now, the edge of the age at which children begin to say things like this, partly a joke, partly a first small displacement of the parents they were starting to see as persons rather than simply as parents. "I'll look into it," Eddie said. "You won't." "No," Eddie agreed. Danny laughed. That was the best thing. That specific sound, specific to one person on Earth, which Eddie had been hearing for 12 years, and which he sometimes thought was the reason he kept the miles going. Not the money, not the habit, not the professional identity, but the simple, renewable fact of it. A person, his person, on the other end of the line, laughing. "Drive safe, Dad." "Always." He sat in the lot for a while after, not afraid, not the paralyzed, trapped animal fear he'd felt in October, sitting in this same lot with a bitten lip and a dead company's phone ringing in his ear. Something else, not peace exactly. He was not a man who used that word without suspicion. Something more practical than peace. Awareness, maybe. The awareness of what the road was and what moved on it and what it asked. The awareness of the specific distance between what he knew and what he could explain, and the decision to drive anyway, because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was the one thing that Walter Cray had told him not to do, and Walter Cray was right, and Walter Cray was still out there on the barrens in the dark, doing the run he'd always done, keeping a hand on the wheel for reasons that outlasted his own ability to explain them. Eddie understood that better now than he had in October. He drove home in the early light, the coast road, the long way, not because he was afraid of Route 9, but because the morning was clear and the ocean was visible from the highway, and he wanted to see it, grey and enormous and cold and entirely itself, doing what oceans did, indifferent to the roads built above it and the trucks that used them and the things that followed certain drivers across certain stretches of ancient barrens dark. The road behind him was empty. The road ahead kept going. He kept his hands at 10 and 2. He kept moving. Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more interesting stories.